New data shows when activity stops protecting health. A major international study involving more than 1.5 million adults has confirmed an important but under-recognized reality. Regular exercise still protects health, but those benefits shrink when long-term exposure to fine particulate pollution, PM 2.5, is high. The findings matter for scientists studying exposure pathways, for environmental and public health professionals shaping policy, and for people simply trying to stay healthy in polluted environments. The research, published in BMC Medicine, combined a systematic review, a meta-analysis, and an individual-level pooled analysis across cohorts in the US, UK, Denmark, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. It examined how PM 2.5 affects the relationship between leisure time physical activity and mortality risk. The conclusions were consistent and compelling. Exercise works, but clean air makes it work better. Not rocket science, but the data is staggering. Exercise helps at every pollution level, but less when PM 2.5 is high. Participants who met recommended activity levels, 7.5 to 15 met hours week, roughly 150 to 300 minutes of moderate exercise, showed substantial differences in health outcomes depending on pollution exposure. At PM 2.5, below 25 mg, all-cause mortality dropped by about 30%. At PM 2.5 above 25 mg/, benefits weakened to 12 to 15%. At 35 to 50 milligrams per member, protection against cancer mortality often disappeared, and benefits for cardiovascular health were significantly reduced. These results were consistent across sexes, age groups, and people with existing cardiovascular disease. In other words, the pattern is not demographic, it's atmospheric. Why pollution interferes with exercise benefits? From a scientific perspective, the attenuation makes sense. PM 2.5 is known to trigger systemic inflammation, impair vascular function, and increase oxidative stress, mechanisms that directly undermine the physiological pathways through which exercise protects the heart, lungs, and immune system. The study synthesizes these effects across diverse populations while providing credible exposure-response data not previously available in such a broad global range. Prior single-country studies rarely included PM2.5 levels above 15 nanograms per kg. This pooled analysis extended the range to nearly 50 nanograms per kg, making it possible to identify the point where benefits begin to erode. Most of the world lives above the threshold. The implications are stark. According to exposure estimates cited in the study, 46% of the global population lives in areas with annual PM 2.5 above 25 milligrams per kg, and 36% lives above 35 milligrams per milliliter. These concentrations overlap exactly with the levels where protective effects of exercise start to diminish and where cancer-related benefits become non-significant. For environmental advocates and air quality professionals, this reinforces a central point. Improving air quality is not only about reducing disease, it's about unlocking the full health value of physical activity, one of the most cost-effective public health tools available. What the exposure response curve tells us, the analysis provides one of the clearest exposure response curves to date, linking long-term particle pollution, physical activity, and mortality. Across all cohorts, the protective effect of meeting recommended activity levels showed a nonlinear response. The curve remained relatively stable across lower pollution ranges, but steepened sharply once long-term exposure exceeded roughly 25 micrograms per meter. This pattern aligns with established physiological pathways. Fine particulate matter triggers systemic inflammation, increases oxidative stress, and impairs endothelial function, mechanisms that raise cardiovascular and cancer risk. Exercise normally counters these pathways by improving vascular elasticity, boosting immune function, and reducing chronic inflammation. But at higher pollution concentrations, PM-driven inflammatory responses appear strong enough to partially offset these benefits. The study's pooled dataset also revealed significant clustering of outcomes across pollution strata. For example, hazard ratios for cancer mortality among active adults approached or exceeded 1.0 at 35 to 50 milligrams per milligram, suggesting that biological stress from chronic particle exposure may overwhelm exercise-linked protective mechanisms. These patterns remained consistent in subgroup analyses of older adults, males and females, and individuals with pre-existing cardiovascular disease, strengthening the evidence that the attenuation effect is environmental rather than demographic. Because prior research has typically been limited to narrow pollution ranges within single countries, these findings help define a clearer global threshold for when chronic exposure becomes physiologically consequential. What the public should take away. The study shows that while exercise remains one of the most effective tools for reducing mortality risk, its full benefits depend on the environment in which people live. Air quality acts as a limiting factor. Cleaner air strengthens the protective effects of physical activity, while long-term pollution reduces them. For public health leaders and environmental professionals, the takeaway is direct. Improving air quality is not only a pollution control strategy, but a way to ensure that everyday healthy behaviors deliver their highest possible impact. And don't forget to submit your entry for the 2026 awards program. Deadline is 12/31/2025.